Hi, everyone. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. This is another Dump the Corruption show. Hey, Steve, how are you? And our topic for tonight is Dump the Corruption includes dumping the fascists. So, I'm going to start tonight. Hang on just a second. Let me get oriented here. I've lost my place for just a moment, but I will be there very shortly. I want to start with a quote from the final piece we're going to look at here today. It's a quote from Will Bunche, who's the author of that piece. And the quote says, "There needs to be an active pro-democracy movement in the United States that is bigger, more visible, and more determined than the MAGA movement that seeks to destroy it, that is, to destroy democracy. They should be organizing right now, crafting new messages, posting on TikTok, making themselves known, knocking on doors, registering every voter, and talking to and listening to millions of disillusioned young people. We can enter a new year with high hopes and not existential dread. But we have to remember that hopes only come true through action." That was Will Bunche's call, action. Okay, what I want to say here tonight is that uh, if we really want to dump the fascists here in America, and we want to win against them, then we have to dump, the corruption, because it's the corruption that we've had for so many years that has created the fertile ground for fascism to grow here, in America. I'm going to move now to an article that appeared in Common Dreams. It's called "Victory Over Fascism in America Must Come from the Ballot Box." It's by Tom Hartman. And it says, that Americans who believe in democracy and reject strongman oligarchy must turn out next November in overwhelming numbers and so shatter the GOP that the party will be forced to reinvent itself. Now, I'm not necessarily quoting that with approval. Yes, That has to happen, to the GOP for us to be free from fascism from that quarter. But what Tom, I think, does not see is that we also must have turnout in such overwhelming numbers that it shatters the Democratic Party as well, so that that party will be forced to reinvent itself. This article by Tom Hartman appeared at tomhartman.com before it came to Common Dreams. It was published on December 28th, 2023. Tom says, how would you react if one day you were sitting at home and the phone rang, and when you picked it up, you heard a man shout, "Kill yourself now so we can save the ammo"? Moments later, an email arrives that says, "I hope the federal government hangs you and your daughter from the Capitol dome, you treasonous piece of shit. I pray that I will be sitting close enough to hear your next snap." That is what happened to, quote, Shay, unquote, Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman when former President Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani decided to blame Trump's loss in Georgia on them, incorrectly claiming that they were stuffing ballots for President Joe Biden. Just a few hours later, a mob with torches and a bullhorn showed up at Freeman's house, although she'd already left after being warned by the FBI that she was on the, quote, kill list, unquote, of a January 6th defendant they had just arrested. Mitt Romney, speaking with writer McKay Coppins for his book, by Romney, A Reckoning, told him the story of multiple Republican senators who were so terrified of violence. Hang on a second, I have to let Dee in. She's come to join us. Oh, I'm sorry, I never got that. I never got the Tom Hartman article shared. So let me do that. Okay, so and let me let in Dee because she's waiting there.
Hello, everyone. How you doing?
Hi, Dee. How are you doing?
Okay.
Thanks for joining.
You're welcome.
We're going through a Tom Hartman article, which is called, the name of it is Victory Over Fascism in America Must Come from the Ballot Box. I've already made the comment that shattering at the ballot box not only has to be a shattering of the GOP,
Yes.
it also has to be a shattering of the Democratic Party too.
Oh, definitely.
Because both parties, in different ways, slightly different ways, are driving us towards a victory for fascism, over us all.
True.
So I got into part of the article where Mitt Romney, speaking with the writer McKay Coppins for his book, Romney: A Reckoning, told him the story of multiple Republican senators who were so terrified of violence at the hands of Trump's fascist followers that they set aside their consciences and voted against convicting him of trying to blackmail Ukrainian President uh, um, Volodymyr Zelensky, and later trying to overthrow the government of the United States. One Republican congressman confided to Romney that he wanted to vote for Trump's second impeachment, but chose not to out of fear for his family's safety. The congressman reasoned that Trump would be impeached by House Democrats with or without him. Why put his wife and children, at risk if it won't change the outcome? This is a very long quote from Romney. Later, during the Senate trial, Romney heard, I'm sorry, it's actually from the author McKay Coppins, who was doing a biography of Romney. Later, during the Senate trial, Romney heard the same calculation while talking with a small group of Republican colleagues. And one senator, member of leadership, said he was leaning toward voting to convict. The others urged him to reconsider. You can't do that, Romney recalled someone saying. Think of your personal safety, said another. Think of your children. The senator eventually decided they were right. Tom goes on. I know liberals and regular reporters in the media were quite happy trash talking Biden, but are frankly terrified of the possibility that Trump or one of his high profile followers might sick Trump's fascist fanboys on them. As a result, they self censor. Similarly, multiple judges in the past few months have been given the chance to take Trump off the ticket because of his clear violation of the Constitution's 14th Amendment by inciting and supporting an insurrection. Each one whiffed, and their legal logic was so thin, it's reasonable to conclude they're also unwilling to have their families suffer the death threats and harassment that comes with being, unquote, enemy of Trump, unquote. When the justices on the Colorado Supreme Court finally found the spine to vote him off the ballot, within hours the threats began. Now they're having to pay for security for themselves and their family members and go to sleep every night dreading the possibility that a lone wolf Trump supporter, like the one who broke into Paul Pelosi's home and attacked him with a hammer, might be looking for them too. As NBC News reported, Trump's followers reacted to the Colorado justices with predictable ferocity. Quote, this ends when we kill these fuckers, unquote, a user wrote on a pro-Trump forum that was used by several January 6th by rioters. Quote, kill judges, behead judges, roundhouse kick a judge into the concrete, unquote. Read a post on a fringe website, quote, slam dunk a judge's baby into the trash can, unquote. NBC's Ryan Riley added, the threats fit into a predictable and familiar pattern, seen time and time again after legal developments against Trump. Thus, Jack Smith was unable to find even 4 Supreme Court justices who were willing to grant cert, that's certiorari, to hear his challenge to Trump's claim of absolute immunity from prosecution. Terrified, they left the case with the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals in the hope those judges will draw Trump's ire and his followers' fire, thus diluting their own risk. This is how fascism takes over a nation from within, with violence and the fear of violence. I've been doing now what is the nation's largest progressive radio TV show for 20 years, reaching an estimated audience of 6 million a week. My writings here on HartmanReport.com are frequently reprinted by other progressive media. The result is that I regularly get threats, although this is not a phenomenon shared by my right-wing colleagues. When I asked a couple of right-wing radio hosts I've known for years if they get threats of violence or death, each said, quote, no, unquote. There is no movement advocating political violence in either the American left or in the center. It is entirely cut down to the American right. And the media needs to admit that. And the FBI needs to recalibrate their efforts. As fascism expert and historian, Emilio Gentili noted about how fascist movements start and gain power. In the beginning, there was violence. Violence and the threats of violence are the key to understanding fascists like Trump and the movements they inspire. As any professional interrogator can tell you, deep down inside, all of us humans are really just scared little kids. The more we're broken down by the circumstances of life or government policy, the less secure we feel. The harder it is to get by in life, and the more scared we become. And for many people, out of that fear comes the willingness, hell, the enthusiasm to embrace, quote, Big Daddy, unquote, in the form of a tough guy leader who promises to restore, quote unquote, those who feel the fear back to their previous or imagined future positions of power, wealth, and authority. This becomes particularly easy for fascist leaders when their followers are convinced that the nation's government has become hopelessly corrupt. Project right-wing fossil fuel billionaires, right-wing media, and Republican politicians have been promoting here in the United States for decades. And I have to add that there's been a project by Democratic politicians also that has been leading to fascism. That project has been one to ignore the needs of the many, but to kowtow to the billionaires and to the kinds of policies they wish to see, and to practice, uh, uh, to involve themselves in the practice of austerity, in government, and failure to create the programs that the people need for their growth, and their prosperity. That is what creates the atmosphere in which the fascist leaders can thrive. Going back to Tom's piece, ever since the Reagan Revolution and their zeal to cut their own taxes and stop the regulation of the fossil fuel and other polluting industries, they've been hammering the message that our government has been seized by, quote, deep state socialists, unquote, like Joe Biden, right? A deep state socialist bent on destroying our country. Republicans and the billionaires who own them have repeated this conspiracy theory so often for the last few decades that an entire religion, specifically QAnon, has arisen around it. This belief that much of what our government does is illegitimate, or even malicious, makes it easy for low information voters to bind themselves to a fascist, quote, reform movement, unquote, that promises better times ahead. As fascist followers act out their violent threats against their leaders' perceived enemies, they get an inner sense of strength, the feeling that they've joined a community that diminishes their own fear for a short while. The more, and other quote unquote political enemies, racial, religious, and gender minorities, women, are blamed for the ills of the nation, the more vigilante style violence against them is justified, and the more violent the future becomes. When the state pushes back against that violence, as America did after January 6th, the calls for increased violence become even louder. Trump is practically shouting, quote, kill them, unquote, with a bullhorn. And even our court system is afraid to stop him by throwing him into jail, as they would have any other common criminal who encouraged such violence against judges, juries, witnesses, court officials, and their families. Calling people to violence by denouncing those being scapegoated is central to fascist politics. Uh, Mussolini used to feature Italian quote whistleblowers unquote, who, like Joe McCarthy here back in the day, would call our quote corrupt unquote government officials, whose only real crime was not supporting him. Hitler had every radio station in Germany play phone calls from local citizens who denounced their neighbors for sympathizing with Jews, socialists, or trade union organizers. Once publicly targeted in these ways, mobs or lone wolf assassins would descend on these people's homes. After a few well publicized beatings and killings, everybody from media figures to politicians to judges backed away from trying to stop fascists or even hold them accountable. When he was rising to power in Hungary, for example, Viktor Orban's right hand man led a torchlight march uh, uh, into a Budapest Roma neighborhood, threatening to burn the quote gypsies unquote who fled in terror out of their homes. More recently, Orban started arresting people who quote defamed unquote him on social media. Soon, nobody in or out of the government is willing to stand up to the fascists. It's too dangerous and too exhausting. Being the object of regular threats of violence or death is not something anybody would volunteer for, unless they saw the stakes as being very, very important. This is what Trump and the GOP he's captured are working toward: the silencing of dissent and accountability, replacing them with fear and a guilty complicity. Just take a look at the state of social media today, particularly Twitter and Facebook, which have dialed back on their content moderation and thus loose the fascists on anybody who dares criticize Trump or the GOP. As Michael Ebner wrote in his book, Ordinary Violence, in Mussolini's Italy, fascist state ruled Italy violently. This is a quote from Ebner's book, projecting its coercive power deeply and diffusely into society through confinement, imprisonment, low-level physical assaults to economic deprivations, intimidation, discrimination, and other quotidian forms of coercion. Moreover, by promoting denunciatory practices, the regime cemented the loyalties of, quote, upstanding, unquote, citizens while suppressing opponents, dissenters, and social outsiders. Trump is telling us right now, that he intends to rule as a fascist if he's able to win or seize power through other means in 2024, Informally, his militia followers will be showing up at polling places next fall to intimidate voters. They see themselves as the shock troops of the new GOP. Formally, he's planning on ending your and my protections against state-sponsored police violence, which he openly intends to deploy against anybody who opposes him and his regime. This is a quote from Trump, I'm also going to indemnify our police officers. This is a big thing, and it's a brand new thing, and I think it's so important. I'm going to indemnify to the federal government all police officers and law enforcement officials throughout the United States from being destroyed by the radical left for taking strong actions against crime. When Trump says, quote, crime, unquote, of course he's using the same fascist speak that Hitler, Mussolini, Putin, and Orban used that means, quote, minorities, unquote, and, quote, the political enemies, unquote. And his followers are listening and acting. The Anti-Defamation League published a report finding there have been more than 170 murders committed by right-wing, and I add, therefore, probably Trump-aligned extremists over the past 5 years. Only 3 deaths could be attributed to people, who were on the left, quote unquote. None of the victims were, quote, criminals, quote unquote. So how does a nation deal with an epidemic of violent rhetoric and actual violent attempts? Fascists are always a minority when they rise to power in a country. They're experts at actually manipulating democratic systems, particularly through things like voter suppression, gerrymandering, voter roll purges, voter intimidation to seize power, and then corrupting the existing systems and laws in ways that keep them in power. And here I have to comment. The fascists who are experts, at actually manipulating democratic systems are not always Republicans. You have to look at the Democratic Party this year and their manipulation of the primary system. The primary system is rigged for Joe Biden. We are seeing, the rigging. There was news today that Joe Biden and his supporters were able to rig the primary system in yet, another state, I gather, so that there would be no primary. I don't know which state it is. I haven't had a chance to read the article yet, but the Democratic primary has been eliminated again, or has been so manipulated in the state that the only possible choice, is Joe Biden. So this has been going on before our eyes, in this election year. Not only is the democratic system being manipulated every day by money, of course, but we're seeing voter suppression, gerrymandering, and voter roll purges, and voter intimidation, and rigging of the rules of primaries every day. And this kind, of manipulation and cheating is not restricted to one party. It's something going on, in both of the parties. And this is done to seize power and then corrupting the existing systems and laws and ways to keep them, in power. At the moment, the fascist movement in the U.S. is very much confined within the GOP and aligned, with fringe militia and fundamentalist religious factions. I would say the visible fascist movement is very much confined, okay, inside of the GOP. But I think fascism, okay, is in the Democratic Party too, and it's being used to silence, okay, dissent, okay, in that particular party, and to do things like conflate, for example, opposition to the regime in Israel with anti-Semitism, so that people, including hundreds of thousands and maybe millions, okay, of Jews, are being attacked as anti-Semites because they dare to question what the Israeli government is doing, okay, in Gaza. Getting back to the article, though, um, Tom says, okay, Merrick Garland should have come down on them hard as soon as he assumed his job as Attorney General, because he dithered for 2 full years until he was shamed into appointing Jack Smith by the January 6th committee. Trump's fascist followers have gained considerable momentum by continuing to refuse to investigate or prosecute the people who are still in power and conspired with Trump to overthrow our government. Garland further empowers America's homegrown fascist movement. I have to agree with that. I think that Garland really dithered for 2 years, okay, in pursuing Trump, and he took considerable time, okay, off the clock, okay, that was available to fight against the legal manipulations that Trump was going to use to defend himself in this particular situation. Getting back to the article, this must stop. And news that the FBI has finally acquired some of the content of Congressman Scott Perry's phone is a positive sign, albeit too little and too late. But the ultimate victory over fascism in America has to be in the ballot box rather than the courthouse. Americans who believe in democracy and reject strongman oligarchy must turn out next November in overwhelming numbers and so shatter the GOP that the party will be forced to reinvent itself in a way that includes purging itself of its fascist supporting members. And we damn well better succeed, because fascists never give you a second chance to defeat them or hold them to account. If we try to stop them and fail, Trump has already told us he'll have a nice cold cell waiting for you and me in the concentration camps he promises to build to hold, quote, millions, unquote. There is pretty much nothing more important now than waking up our friends and neighbors to this threat. Okay, so Tom is not exactly saying here that we have to rely on a defeat of Trump, okay, by the ballot box. But he's saying the ultimate victory has to be, okay, in the ballot box rather than in the courthouse. I don't know about, okay, the ultimate victory, but I think that if Trump can be kept off of the ballot, okay, by legal maneuvering here in the United States, okay, at this time, okay, and if Biden can be kept off of the ballot by legally maneuvering, that would be good to see. Because if that happens, we would have an election that would be much different. I have to say here, that the reason why Trump is still doing so well in the polls is because of Biden's candidacy. It's because no one wants to see Joe Biden be president of the United States, again. Trump, is benefiting, from that. It's not that people love Trump so much and that he is so popular. He still has poll numbers that are below 50%. He hasn't become a popular presidential candidate. But when it comes to a choice, with the terrible performance of Biden getting worse, and worse, more people just sort of give in to Trump as the more realistic candidate who is part of the political system. Yes, it's important that we turn out, if all else fails, if the efforts to bar Trump and Biden from the ballot should fail, then it's true that Americans who believe in democracy must turn out in overwhelming numbers, in November. But they need to shatter both of the parties, it seems to me, not only, the GOP, because both of the parties are knee deep, in the corruption that has brought us to this point, that has brought us to the point, of fascism. And if we only get rid, of the party that is more openly fascist, than the other, we will not have solved, the problem. Because the roots of fascism are in the corruption and the oligarchy that the corruption has created in our country. We may not have a strongman oligarchy right now. We have, an oligarchy that is run by the corporations and the huge and powerful interests that have bought, our political system. We have to get rid of that system. That is the task before us. It will help greatly if we can get rid of the two central figures vying for power in that system, specifically Joe Biden, and Donald Trump. If we can get rid of them both, and if we could structure things so no one will vote for their parties, we would likely get some much better candidates coming to the fore, and a much better candidate, getting elected as president of the United States. Not to mention, if we follow the dump the corruption rule, we will also get an entirely new Congress and a Senate that has new and different senators occupying 1/3 of the Senate seats, which would surely change the balance of power, in the Senate, and result in legislation much more in line with the interests, of the people. So that is our task, for the fall. But it's a mistake to think it has to be concentrated upon one party. What we have to concentrate it on, is the two parties, and getting rid of the corruption, in them, and getting rid of the corruption broadly, within our political system. So I move to my second piece now. Let me stop the screen here and move to my second piece.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing is that we're just so doomed here in the USA. I mean, you look at it, the DNC is not allowing you to vote for anybody else. They're just having Biden as their candidate.
Yeah, they're shoving Biden down our throats. They're completely undemocratic, okay, in their selection. I mean, some democracy, and then they talk about, saving democracy. They're not saving democracy. They're facilitating the end of democracy by rigging the primary elections for Joe Biden.
Right. That's what I would think. Everybody should vote independent.
Yes, I think everybody should vote independent or vote for the Green Party or vote for some other party whose candidates clearly have the interests of the public, okay, in mind. And people have to ignore the basically practical notion that, well, there are only two choices. We've just got these two choices. That's all we have. That's not true. There'll be other people who are on the ballot in many states. It's necessary to vote for them because, for the most part, they will not be big money candidates. And if they are big money candidates, we can vote against those. But the Green Party candidates will not be big money candidates. Uh,
Right.
they will not have corruption, okay, around them. And there are other third parties as well that uh, will not have drunk from the big money fountain.
Hmm.
They will not be bought. And so there will be people to vote for. And we have to fight against the fear that if we vote for anybody else, we will be wasting, okay, our vote. And we have to fight against the idea that we somehow should only vote, okay, for winners. So here's the second piece that I wanted to share.
Okay.
Maine and Colorado officials face threats after Trump is barred, okay, from the ballots. Quote, this behavior is unacceptable, declared Maine Secretary of State Shanna Bellows, while her Colorado counterpart, Jenna Griswold, vowed that, quote, I will not be intimidated. It's by Jessica Corbett on December 31st, 2023. Depending upon the decisions of U.S. courts, former President Donald Trump won't appear on 2024 primary ballots in Maine and Colorado. Recent developments that have led to threats against top election officials in those states. Trump is the GOP's frontrunner to challenge Democratic President Joe Biden, who is seeking re-election next year, despite the Republicans' ongoing criminal cases and arguments that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution disqualifies him from holding office again because he incited the January 6, 2021 insurrection. In response to Maine voters formally challenging Trump's eligibility under the 14th Amendment, Democratic Secretary of State Shanna Bellows barred him from the primary ballot on Thursday, though she suspended the decision until courts rule on any appeal, and his campaign plans to file one. A day later, her home was swatted, quote unquote. Quote, we are away for the holiday weekend. This is a quote from Shanna Bellows. We were not home yesterday when threats escalated and our home address was posted online, unquote. Bellows explained on Facebook Saturday, quote, it was a good thing because our home was swatted last night. That's when someone calls in a fake emergency to evoke a strong law enforcement response to scare the target. Swatting incidents have resulted in casualties, although thankfully this one did not. Quote, this behavior is unacceptable, unquote, she declared. Quote, the nonstop threatening communications the people who work for me endured all day yesterday is unacceptable. It's designed to scare not only me, but also others into silence to send a message, unquote. This is the violence of fascism but being used against, okay, a state official who makes a decision that they don't like. Now, there are many things you can do to express the idea that you don't like a decision. You can do that freely on Facebook and Twitter and stuff like that. But threatening violence is out of bounds. It should be entirely out of bounds in our society, and there should be strong police responses to it. After a hoax emergency call, going back to the article, which an individual claimed he had broken into the Secretary of State's residence on Friday night, Maine State Police, quote, conducted an investigation of the exterior and interior of the home at Bellows' request, unquote. News Center Maine reported, citing State Department of Public Safety spokesperson Shannon Moss. Quote, Moss said nothing suspicious was found, unquote. The outlet noted, quote, the incident is still under investigation, and Moss said no further information will be released at this time, along with slamming the swatting. Bellows on Saturday called out, quote, extraordinarily dehumanizing fake images, unquote, of her recently posted online, including by the Maine Wire. Quote, these dehumanizing images and threatening communications directed at me and people I love are dangerous. We should be able to agree to disagree on important issues without threats and violence, unquote. Solidarity with Maine Secretary of State Shannon Bellows. This is a tweet, okay, from Mehdi Hassan. And shame on Donald Trump and his allies for inciting and normalizing this violent stuff over the past decade. This was a quote tweet of an Elizabeth West tweet. Of course, the abuse and threats are only beginning. And Shannon Bellows said, dear friends, thank you for the messages of love and support. I've been moved by everyone, especially by those from friends and loved ones who disagree with my decision but have reached out to express love and respect. Many of you have asked if Brandon and I are safe. We are away for the holiday weekend. We were not home yesterday when threats escalated, and our home address was posted online. It was a good thing because our home was swatted last night. And then she stated what I previously read. The behavior is unacceptable. The nonstop threatening communications the people who worked for me endured all day yesterday is unacceptable. It's designed to scare not only me, but also others. Colorado Democratic Secretary of State Jenna Griswold has also faced mounting threats since the Colorado Supreme Court earlier this month disqualified Trump from the state's primary ballot, a decision that is expected to be swiftly reviewed by the right-wing majority U.S. Supreme Court, to which the ex-president appointed 3 justices. Quote, within 3 weeks of the lawsuit being filed, I received 64 death threats. I stopped counting after that, Griswold said Saturday on social media. Quote, I will not be intimidated. Democracy and peace will triumph over tyranny and violence. Griswold also shared a recent HuffPost interview in which she discussed threats against her from Trump supporters. Quote, I've been concerned about violence and threats of violence since Donald Trump incited the insurrection, unquote, said Griswold, who's been Colorado Secretary of State since 2019. Quote, I've received hundreds, if not thousands, of threats at this point, unquote. Quote, so yes, I'm extremely concerned, unquote, she told HuffPost. It just underlines that Donald Trump is a major threat to American democracy, elections, and stability. He uses threats and intimidations against his political opponents. When he doesn't win elections, he tries to steal them. He is a dangerous leader for this country, unquote. Griswold also pointed out she's part of the case that got Trump kicked off the ballot in Colorado because of her role, but she didn't file the suit. It was brought by a watchdog group and legal team representing GOP, that is Republican, and unaffiliated voters. And she tweeted, my job as Secretary of State is to make sure Coloradans have great elections. I hope SCOTUS makes a quick decision as to whether they review the case disqualifying Trump from the Colorado ballot. Griswold further explained in an MSNBC appearance on Friday that, quote, in Maine, Secretary of State makes determinations like this. By the way, in Colorado, I also would be in a place of making a determination if a lawsuit wasn't filed so early, unquote. Quote, but in Maine, I think Shannon Bellows made the right decision in agreement with the Colorado Supreme Court, unquote, she said, and quote again, Quote, Donald Trump incited an insurrection trying to steal the presidency from the American people. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment makes it very clear that elected officials can't do that and then serve in office again. Quote, I don't believe there should be some loophole in the Constitution that puts only Donald Trump above the law. Constitution when he incites rebellion or incites an insurrection, unquote, she continued. Quote, the other thing I would say is I do think Secretary Bellows is brave and courageous, unquote. She, quote, she's the first individual by herself having to make this decision, unquote, Griswold noted. Quote, again, and we are acutely aware of the threat environment that we work in, so I commend her for her actions, and we'll see how the litigation inevitably plays out in the state of Maine, unquote. So this essentially reiterates the point made by Tom Hartman. The fascists are resorting to violence and threats of violence right now, as we approach the election of 2024. That election will be marked by continuing threats of violence. We all have to fight against that. We all have to become brave, okay, and courageous, okay, as Shanna Bellows was. We all have to expect that there will be these kinds of threats that will be coming to us. And we have to stand and fight. Okay, as Chris Hedges has said, we fight fascists, not because we expect to win. We fight fascists because they are fascists. So, I want to move now, unless you have a comment, Dee, I want to move quickly to my third piece.
Go ahead. You move to your third piece.
Okay, the third piece is more legal. Okay, I want to address that because it's a very good piece. It addresses the Supreme Court issue and says the Supreme Court should decide Trump's ballot eligibility without fear, okay, or favor. And it's by Ian Bassan from Protect the Democracy. I don't think he's protecting a democracy at this point because we are not a democracy at this point, as we all know, because our legislators and our president and the main figures in both our parties have been bought, okay, by the wealthy. So we are not a democracy. The people do not rule. We are an oligarchy right now. And what we need to do is to fight for our democracy. Anyway, the tagline on this piece is, the harsh reality is that the only way to get past this crisis for our democracy is to go through it. Our institutions were built to survive this, but only if we use them. Abdication, capitulation, surrender. That's how we guarantee democracy loses. This was written on January 1st, 2024. On Tuesday, the Colorado Supreme Court held Donald Trump engaged in insurrection under the terms of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. Therefore, the court held he is ineligible from serving as president as if he was not yet 35 years old or not a natural-born citizen. Two are the constitutional requirements for holding the presidency. This decision has raised a lot of questions, both legal and political, about what this means for our democracy, for the election, and for the U.S. Supreme Court. It has generated and will continue to generate no shortage of speculation about how we as a nation and our institutions should meet this moment. Before getting into analysis of that here, let's start with two facts on which there should be broad agreement. First, we are only in this situation as a nation because of Donald Trump and his actions. Well, I have to say that I don't agree with that. That we are, okay, in this situation because of the feckless behavior and the corrupt behavior of both parties leading up to Donald Trump's run in 2016. If not for that behavior, let's just take one example. Okay, if when he had huge majorities in Congress, okay, if Obama had supported, okay, a Medicare for All bill then and gotten it through Congress, there would have been no challenge from Donald Trump in 2016. Okay, if Obama had passed, okay, a stimulus bill instead of holding it to under $1 trillion, if he had listened to his chief of the Council of Economic Advisors at that time, by Christina Romer, and put in a stimulus bill of $1.8 trillion, we would have been out of the Great Recession within 6 months. If he then had moved on to a strong FinReg bill that regulated the banks in a very, very strong way, and he then moved on, he could have passed that. These things could have been done quickly. By the end of March, the Medicare for All bill could have been in place. By the end of June, the strong FinReg bill could have been put in place. By July, he could have been moving to a Green New Deal. And he could have legislated that. He had huge majorities in Congress at this time. But he was only interested in bailing the rich out so that he could protect them from the pitchforks, so that he could have a nice, easy presidency, relatively easy presidency, and thereafter he could use his position as a former president to get filthy rich, which is exactly what he has done. It's the corruption, stupid. And he was not the first. Bush was guilty of that. Clinton was guilty of that. In fact, Clinton was Obama's model. Okay, Bush II was also the creature, okay, of the big money contributions. Our foreign policy towards Israel, towards the whole of Western Asia, okay, is dictated by the big money. So we are not only in this situation as a nation because of Donald Trump and his actions. No, Donald Trump is only the symptom. He has causal agency himself, of course, because he's chosen to follow the naked fascist route. But in the run-up to this, okay, the Democrats were creating a kind of soft totalitarianism, which has deprived the people of any important say in their government. So Trump is not the only guilty party here. But going on, to the extent the nation is at a difficult crossroads, we have Trump to blame. But for his actions, none of this comes to pass. Well, he was certainly the final factor. But even there, we have to blame, okay, the Democrats for their feckless resistance to Trump and for their nomination of Hillary Clinton in 2016. If Hillary Clinton had not been nominated for the presidency, Donald Trump wouldn't have won in 2016. Bernie Sanders would have trounced him. It was because of the corruption of the Democratic Party that the bad choice between Trump and Clinton was set up. That's why Trump won. So, but for his actions, none of this comes to pass. Second, he brought this all upon us because he refused to accept defeat when he lost the 2020 election. His continued refusal to accept that he lost is straining our institutions and our civic fabric. And so, okay, it is. But why did he have the opportunity to do all that? Why? Because Biden ran a pretty feckless campaign. And because they insisted on nominating Biden. Again, if they had nominated Sanders, 2020 wouldn't even have been close. But no, they had to retain control, okay, of the consultants' deal flow. It was about the deal flow for them inside of the Democratic Party, that he got to have a close election, that he could complain, that it wasn't, okay, a real defeat. It was the two parties that set us up for Trump to be able to do that. It wasn't his fault alone. Now that he has put us all in this situation, the U.S. Supreme Court, and especially the Roberts majority, has a real dilemma on its hands. Oh, I feel so sorry for them. It has advertised itself as being a textualist and originalist court in which the words say what they mean and were intended to mean when adopted. And as several Federalist Society aligned professors have written persuasively, and as Judge J. Michael Lutig, who comes out of the same legal school of thought as the Supreme Court majority, has argued, the meaning of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment by its terms and intent was to bar someone who did what Donald Trump did from holding office again. So if the court is just applying the law, then a straight read of the law requires them to uphold the Colorado decision. But of course, the court does not exist in a vacuum. As Jesse Wegman wrote in the New York Times, as the justices in Washington weigh these matters, they will no doubt be aware of the political unrest surrounding them. They know that Mr. Trump has built a large political following and is marshaling his followers to turn against the justice system for indicting him, to intimidate law enforcement officials and court personnel and anyone else who gets in his way. They are aware that he will whip his diehard followers into a frenzy against the Supreme Court itself, just as he unleashed his followers to try to bend Congress to his will on January 6th. So the question for the Supreme Court is as much about the 14th Amendment as it is about whether the rule of law, the rule of the mob, is the governing order of our land. Faced with that question, there can be only one answer. The court must apply the law without fear or favor. Some are already blanching at that possibility, have raised a number of good faith and in some cases bad faith objections, so let's take them in turn. The objections to the Colorado decision. The first objection is that the court disqualifying Trump from running might not be the best outcome for the country. That if Trump is to be denied the presidency, better it comes at the hands of voters. This argument rests on the assumption that Trump's supporters would be more likely to accept a defeat at the ballot box than a disqualification in court. I have to add here, it rests, on another assumption. And that assumption is that the election of 2024 is going to be a fair election, a free and fair election. But the truth is, it's already not a free and fair election because the Democrats are rigging the primary in their party to see to it that Joe Biden is the candidate of the Democrats. And the Democrats are working assiduously to deny the ballot to third-party candidates and independents. We know they're working very hard to deny the ballot to Bobby Kennedy. We know they're going to work as hard as it takes to try to deny the ballot to Jill Stein and the Green Party. We know the Democratic Party is going to do that. We know the Democratic Party is going to rig the election on their side. And we know that if Trump wins the primary, in the Republican Party, huge amounts of money will be forthcoming supporting Trump in relation to the general election. The general election is going to be rigged by money, both from the Democratic side and from the Republican side. The whole thing is going to be rigged by the money. The congressional election is going to be rigged by the money. Unless, of course, we can get this Stump the Corruption movement actually started. But if we can't, it's going to be rigged by the money. So that's another assumption that he doesn't mention here. The argument rests on the assumption that Trump supporters would be more likely to accept defeat at the ballot box, disqualification. But the other assumption is that if the decision is made at the ballot box, that it will be a free and fair decision by the voters, that decision will come at the hands of the voters and not at the hands of the contributors. Trump may not be denied the presidency. His contributors, his members of the oligarchy, may be more powerful than the oligarchs on the Democratic side. And the voters may be manipulated more successfully than his people than by Biden's people. That is why I am not enthusiastic about leaving it to the voters. I might be more enthusiastic if the Dump the Corruption movement was up and running and everybody was seeing it. Then I would be trusting the ballot box. But now I'm not trusting the ballot box because we don't have free and fair elections here anymore. They're run by money. Going on with the article. But that assessment is belied by the evidence. His supporters got a chance to accept his defeat at the ballot box in 2020, and in large numbers refused. Letting the voters throw him out, so to speak, led to a violent insurrection and him running again on an even more openly authoritarian platform. It's unclear why those making this argument expect anything different to happen if he loses the ballot box this time. In all likelihood, having had several years to rally his base into even greater distrust of elections and our institutions, their reaction to a Trump electoral loss in 2024 is likely to produce an even more destructive reaction than in 2020. That is hardly something for the court, he's talking about the Supreme Court, to defer to. A second and related concern is a more small d democratic one, that as a matter of governing philosophy, it should ultimately be up to the voters to decide who the president should be, not courts. That may be a reasonable political theory, but is decidedly not what the American Constitution lays out. And I have to point out, again, it assumes that there will be a free and fair election so the voters can make a rational decision. But that is not what we have. But anyway, he's right. He says it's decidedly not what the American Constitution lays out. The Constitution has numerous gating requirements for the presidency, a 35-year-old age requirement, and the requirement that candidates be natural-born citizens is just two of them. Earlier this month, the Republican Secretary of State in Arkansas barred the talk show host Cenk Uygur from appearing on their presidential ballot because Uygur was born overseas. There were no howls of protest from those objecting to the Colorado decision. Of course not, because the howls of protest are partisan in character. They're from Trump supporters. That the experience of the Civil War, going on with the article, led the United States to add an additional restriction against those who have so grossly violated an oath to the Constitution they once took from being able to serve again is a reasonable decision for us to have made to avoid a repeat of that tragic error. And by the way, I have to point out here that Donald Trump grossly violated his oath to the Constitution from the first day he was in the presidency, because he violated the emoluments clause of the Constitution from that first day, and he violated it throughout his presidency. And he enriched his family while he was president. I know you're going to say Biden did the same thing. Well, Biden did the same thing. That doesn't absolve Trump from what he's done, from the violation of his oath to the Constitution that he took. And there were many other ways in which he violated his oath to the Constitution, too numerous to mention here. He was an illegal president from the first. not because he illegally lost, the election of 2016, though there was plenty voter suppression in 2016 also. Okay. But he was an illegal president because he was violating his oath to the Constitution for the whole time that he was in office. But going on with the article, we could decide as a country to remove that restriction by amending the Constitution, or Congress can override it by a two-thirds vote in individual circumstances under the very terms of Section 3. But short of that, simply nullifying or ignoring it makes no more sense than nullifying or ignoring the First Amendment or the Equal Protection Clause if a bare majority at a single moment in time prefer that. And let's not forget, if Trump's argument is that the majority of voters should ultimately determine the president full stop, he wouldn't have become president in 2016 when the majority of voters preferred his opponent. The third objection is rooted in a fear of violence. But surely as a nation, we do not believe violent mobs should be able to intimidate courts into declining to apply the law. We have already read reports that members of Congress may have declined to vote to impeach and or convict Trump after impeachment out of fear that doing so might subject themselves or their families to violent retaliation by Trump's most extreme followers. Do we really believe the violent mob he has stirred up should be able to now intimidate a second branch of government to bend its knee to Trump? But even if one believes the court should take the risk of violence into account, Trump's most extreme supporters are unfortunately just as likely to engage in violence if he loses at the ballot box. They've already shown that in 2020, and worse. Experts in political violence warn that violence can be more pronounced when autocrats win than when they lose. When they win, their most violent supporters feel empowered and protected. So if a faction within Trump's base may be prone to engage in violence if he wins or if he loses, should the court contort the law to defer to that? The fourth objection is procedural. That Trump has not been afforded due process and should not be deprived of an opportunity to run without that. This objection is wrong as a matter of both facts and law. On the factual side, Donald Trump is a party in the Colorado case. There was a 5-day trial in the case in which Donald Trump was able to make both factual and legal submissions to the court. Trump will be able to make his case to the U.S. Supreme Court just as he's been able to make his case in the Colorado courts. As a legal matter, critics raising this objection are conflating the rights our system affords to criminal defendants with the rights our system affords in non-criminal proceedings. Holding office is a privilege, not a right. One's eligibility to do so is therefore subject to a lower standard of procedural protections than we give to people whom the system seeks to deprive of their freedom. Here, I have to comment also. There are people who are arguing that Trump has a right, to run. Well, Trump is not the only one who has a right, to run. We all have a right, to run for office. But we don't have an operative right, to run until we have, or unless we have, the money to run. I mean, yes, I can declare myself as running for the presidency tomorrow. But how am I going to get on the ballot? There are all kinds of requirements that differ from state to state that ensure that I will not be able to get on the ballot. So I don't have a right, to run, not an operative right to run, because I can't get on the ballot. Most of you cannot get on the ballot either. Why is Trump able to get on the ballot? Because he has the money. He has the money and he has the support of the Republican Party. That's why he can get, on the ballot. But he has no more right to run than you or I, or anybody else. His money doesn't give him the right to run. There is no operative right to run because of the various rules of the system that bar people, most people, from actually running, that introduce a bias into the system so that poor people cannot run and most middle class people cannot run. So there is no right to run, okay, as a general matter. And Trump doesn't have a right to run. Why doesn't he have a right to run? Because he violated 14th Amendment, Section 3, okay, of the 14th Amendment. There is fairly broad legal consensus that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment does not require a criminal conviction for a crime of insurrection to apply. As Crew, who brought the Colorado case on behalf of several Republican voters, notes in a report, of the 7 historical precedents of people being disqualified under Section 3, not one of them was charged under the criminal, quote, rebellion or insurrection statute, 18, the U.S. Code, Section 2383, or its predecessors, unquote. Section 3 imposes a civil consequence, not a criminal penalty. Therefore, it does not require the same procedures that Trump is entitled to in his criminal cases. He'll get those protections in the 4 cases in which he's been criminally indicted on 91 felony counts. But the Colorado case is a civil question of legal interpretation for which Trump is receiving the same due process protections that every candidate for office receives when their eligibility is challenged, something that frankly happens across the country in lower stakes cases all the time. By the way, I think that's a decisive objection disposed of by the author. The 5th objection is that the Colorado case and subsequent proceedings in the Supreme Court are bad for the country because they are politically helpful to Trump. And since he has shown himself to be a danger to the Republic, anything that helps him is bad for the country. There's likely some truth to the fact that civil and criminal cases against Trump he can use to paint himself as a victim are helpful to him in the Republican primary. But the general election is a different story. History and international experience show that accountability for gross abuses of power tends to reduce the chances of those abuses continuing in the future. In the U.S., in our laboratories of democracy, you should have said our so-called laboratories of democracy. I think they're more actually laboratories of authoritarianism rather than democracy, if we're referring to the state governments. Certainly Florida and Georgia, okay, are laboratories of authoritarianism, and the state of Texas is a laboratory of authoritarianism. When state chief executive, and some people would argue California is a laboratory of authoritarianism. When state chief executives have been held accountable for abuses of power, the legal process playing out has actually been the thing that ultimately lessens their political support. In short, our system tends to work, okay, when it is applied. I don't know, okay, if I agree with that, but there it is. He's refuted or tried to refute that particular objection. Then he comes to, and a final objection is that the U.S. Supreme Court is almost certainly going to overturn this decision, and so it has been a misguided effort and distraction to pursue this path at all. I'll admit, a version of this objection informed why we at Protect Democracy declined to bring one of these cases. That and the concern that disqualifying candidates from the ballot is a tool that can be misused and has been by autocrats overseas, and we should not unsheath that sword if the case was likely to ultimately fail. But that ship has sailed, and there's a compelling counter-argument that any law can be misused, but that's not a sufficient reason not to apply it in the situations for which it was properly intended. While speculation about how the Supreme Court will rule in any case is a popular pastime, it's premature to declare that anyone knows what the Supreme Court will do. Sure, there are 2 justices who will use this case in whatever way they think will most benefit Donald Trump. Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito are such loyal foot soldiers in the Trumpist march on Rome that they've effectively traded in their black robes for red hats. But the other 7 justices may be harder to predict here. Beyond the earlier points about textualism, and originalism, the other 7 justices have repeatedly declined invitations to step in and help Donald Trump in cases in which his personal interests are before them. Unlike members of Congress who must frequently run for office before a Trumpified GOP primary electorate, the justices are not as subject to that pressure. And as we've seen among retired Republican office holders, when no longer faced with the need to run in the GOP primary, they're much more comfortable calling Trump out for the insurrectionist he is. Beyond the merits, though, one potential upshot of this case is that it might and it should force the court to realize that it could not avoid playing a role in the 2024 election, and the sooner it resolves all the relevant cases, the better. The harsh reality is that the only way to get past this crisis for our democracy is to go through it. We can't avoid the calamity Trump has created. Well, as I've said before, it's not only Trump who's created, this calamity, and both parties continue to create it and reinforce the calamity. Twisting our institutions into pretzels to bend to his corruption just capitulates to him in advance. Our institutions were built to survive this, but only if we use them, only if they do their jobs. Abdication, capitulation, surrender. That's how we guarantee democracy loses. This case is a feature of our system, not a bug. Rather than view the current legal situation with regret, we should view this as the system working. Yes, there's one view of this situation, and that it is really unfortunate, almost untenable for the court to be put in this position. That view, which the justices may be thinking, is that it would be profoundly problematic for the court to intervene in an election in this way and deprive the people of their choice of candidate. That is the view that sees checks and balances as a bug in the system rather than a feature. But that's precisely upside down. The founders intentionally created 3 branches that would check and backstop each other as the best safeguard against tyranny. If, for example, the legislative branch in some way failed to safeguard self-government, if, for example, it was so captured by a faction that it failed to convict and impeach president for inciting an insurrection, then there would be a backstop. One of the other branches, either the executive and the courts through prosecution and conviction, and or the courts through implementation of constitutional backstops. The court upholding the Colorado Supreme Court decision, even in the face of extreme political pressure to do otherwise, would be the greatest vindication of the American constitutional system and the founders' invention. That's a quote, I guess. Notion that because the political branches, but I'm not sure where it's a quote from, it might be from the author, just an emphasis. The notion that because the political branches or even the voters caught up in the heat of temporary passions have declined to stop a tyrant, the court should, as a result, step aside, ignores the fundamental genius and design of the system the foundations built, which is one of overlapping checks against tyranny. The Colorado case is a feature, not a bug, and the court upholding the Colorado Supreme Court decision, even in the face of the extreme political pressure to do otherwise, would be the greatest vindication of the American constitutional system and the founders' invention. Here I have to remark that there is a way that's consistent with many other things the court has done to uphold a decision of the Colorado Supreme Court. And that way is simply to say that the election rules for each of the states are set by the state. And that's true for national elections too. And if the state authorities think that Donald Trump is ineligible because of his violation of the 14th Amendment, Section 3, why should the Supreme Court interfere in that? Why should it interfere at all? Why shouldn't it leave it up to the states to decide whether Donald Trump should be on the ballot, or off the ballot? What would be the consequence of this? Well, you might think that if this holds, what's going to happen is that many states will follow Maine and Colorado and will disqualify Donald Trump. Now, okay, if that should happen, and if most of these states are basically blue states, we will then have a situation where Donald Trump could be counted upon to lose those states anyway. So maybe from the point of view of the Electoral College, it doesn't really matter. But what's going to happen, of course, is that there are the blue states and there are the red states, okay, and there are the purple states, and we do not know what will happen within, okay, the purple states, what the secretaries of states in the purple states will decide, okay, to do. But if it turns out that, okay, an electoral majority of states has kept Trump off the ballot, and if they make the decision to do that right now, then the consequence would be that Trump could not possibly win the election. He could not possibly win, okay, a majority of the Electoral College. And if the courts were to decide that in, let's say, oh, I don't know, it's not even a question of a number of states, it's just the states, okay, that hold a majority, okay, of the Electoral College. If in those states he is taken off of the ballot, then it would be suicidal for the Republican Party to nominate him as their candidate for president. And then they would not nominate him. They would find somebody else, and he would be off the ballot. And we would no longer have the Biden-Trump choice to contend with. So that is the way, that is the path for Trump to be taken off the ballot. Okay, the Supreme Court doesn't even have to take the responsibility for this all by itself. It can say, look, we've been particularly concerned about upholding states' rights, okay, as a body for some time now. We defended states' rights, okay, in the abortion case. We've defended also states' rights, okay, in lights of the voting cases. We're going to be consistent. We're going to defend states' rights here, and we're going to say it's up to the states to make this particular decision. Okay, the Supreme Court could deny certiorari and give that reasoning as ground. Say it's obvious the elections in each state are the rules for the elections in each state, okay, are up to the officials of these states. We don't have a role. We're sorry, we don't have a role. And then, of course, the Supreme Court would avoid full responsibility for what happens. The responsibility would devolve instead to the states. And it would be much harder for the fascists, okay, to direct their violence to all of the state officials who had a part in stopping Trump from running for the presidency, okay, of the United States. Going on with the article, if one believes, as the court majority does, that the framers were indeed inspired, this is their chance to show fealty to that design, not when it's easy, but when the founders hoped they would in providing them life tenure when it's hard. The real political import, but whatever the court decides, the American electorate has a new fact before it. Again, from the New York Times, quote, the state Supreme Court has found that Donald Trump engaged in an insurrection in his efforts to overturn the 2020 election by inciting a violent mob to attack the Capitol and is therefore disqualified from serving again as president, unquote. Regardless of how this section of the Constitution is ultimately interpreted and applied, quote, shouldn't both major parties insist on presidential candidates for whom such questions are not even remotely at issue, unquote. That is a question. Because at the end of the day, we as voters want to keep our power to govern ourselves. Above all else, we don't want someone who imposes his will, his interests, his power over ours. We fought a revolution to be free of such tyranny and fought a civil war to add protections against it, like the one at issue here. And if our system is stepping in here to protect our power to self-govern, thanks to the ultimate sacrifices made by so many patriots who came before us, that is something to be celebrated. And I couldn't agree more with that. And obviously, under the circumstances, and because of the corruption of our whole electoral system, I think it would be better for the country if Trump were disqualified by multiple decisions made by multiple people, all indicating that he violated the Constitution of the United States and therefore is ineligible to run once again in 2024. I think that would be a better outcome than allowing him to run for the presidency, again, and corrupt the electoral process even more with his appeals, to violence, and with, his whipping up of an obviously whipping up, a minority of fascists to use violence to overturn, the election, to manipulate and to overturn, the election of 2024. I have no doubts that he's going to try to do this, that his followers, are going to try to do this. If we let him run, we are setting ourselves up for that kind of an election. And in that kind of an election, and especially if his opponent is Joe Biden, we are asking for fascism. We are just asking for it. I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. The Constitution is not a suicide pact. And the idea that we ought to let him run is a stupid and risky idea. And we should not tolerate that idea for one moment, in my view. And in conclusion, I'm going to share, I'm not going to read the whole piece at all. But this is the piece from Common Dreams, by Will Bunche, one of our leading journalists for years and years and years, from the Inquirer, in Philadelphia. Published this on January 1st, 2024. It's a well-written thing. It's not at all complicated. But I want to quote what I quoted before. I guess I will add one paragraph to that. My hope for 2024 is that the silent majority of Americans who still believe in freedom will stop wallowing in despair and waiting for the worst. Instead, these voters should rise up from their couches, get organized, and start taking action to save democracy now, and not 10 months and 1 week from now when it will be too late. There needs to be an active pro-democracy movement in the United States that is bigger, more visible, and more determined than the MAGA movement that seeks to destroy it. They should be organizing right now crafting new messages, posting on TikTok, making themselves no, knocking on doors, registering every voter, and talking to and listening to millions of disillusioned young people. We can enter a new year with high hopes and not existential dread, but we have to remember that hopes only come true through action. I want to see that movement, and I think that movement is the dump the corruption movement. That is the movement we need. It will get rid of both Trump and Biden, all of the corrupt people in the House of Representatives, and 1/3 of the corrupt people, okay, in the Senate. And it will do this all in 2024. It will be a revolution in our politics if everybody follows the rule. You all know what the rule is. I'm not going to show you the rule again, okay, right now. But I will say, I think the democracy movement he's calling for would be fulfilled by the dump the corruption movement. It is the dump the corruption movement. D, any comments?
The dogs are carrying on here, so it's hard to talk.
Okay. Okay, I will go through the other comments. Steve Wolfbrand said Epstein documents started being dumped. Steve, I got to ask you, so what? So the Epstein documents are starting to be dumped. So what does that do in relation to the election of 2024 or to the foreign policy we are following right now? Certainly, it's going to show more and more and more and more corruption. But we have all kinds of evidence that shows our government is shot through with corruption right now. We don't need any more to start voting people out of office. Andy Candy says, Hiya, Joe. Showing my support for the best program on the internet. As usual, listening on, but have two bumpkins on my hands. Love you. Thank you, Andy. Steve says, hi, Andy. Andy says, hi, Wolfie. And Steve says, my friends do call me Wolfie. Well, if that's the case, Steve, I'm going to call you Wolfie from now on. K. Ryan says, laugh out loud, Steve. Candy says, my friends call me Candy, laugh out loud. D says, hello, everyone. Steve says, hi, D. K says, hi, D. And Steve says, Candy, cool name. And D says, hi, Steve, hi, K. And Andy says, isn't inverted totalitarianism when folks give up on voting and the fascists have free reign to do whatever they want? Well, that's not all there is to inverted totalitarianism. The big thing in inverted totalitarianism is that the media manipulates consent and works with the authorities, with the powers that be, to manipulate the consent, okay, of the voting public. So, essentially, the media are used against, okay, the voting public. So the power of decisions, okay, is taken away from them. Okay, and it's the elites who make all the decisions. That's the central characteristic of inverted totalitarianism. Robert Copeland says, President Biden is no socialist. You can certainly say that again. You can say that again. President Biden doesn't have a socialist bone in his failing body. Andy Candy says, over and over again, I find the animosity folks have and willingness to welcome fascism is that they think their taxes on the federal level pays for immigrants and the downtrodden poor. Their taxes don't pay for anything. Andy Candy says, I'm planning my escape because I side with democracy. I think I'm too old to escape. Kay says, I've been tempted since I moved back to Ohio because they ignore our votes. Robert Copeland says, I can see where the DNC will produce political TV ads where they have every stupid comment that Donald Trump has been made since 2016. Okay, says Biden is way better than Rump. Yeah, okay, he may be way better than Rump, but he's exposed us to the risk of nuclear war for the first time in 40 years. Now, I'm not saying that Rump is not going to expose us to the same thing. He will. He certainly will, because on Israel, he's going to be no better than Biden. But the point is, Biden's foreign policy has exposed us all to extinction. What can excuse that? What can excuse that? He may be way better than Rump when it comes to social policy or when it comes to economic policy. Though even there, I'm not sure he's way better than Trump on that. He might have been better than Trump, okay, when it came to COVID, because Trump was just awful, okay, and Biden was just poor. But his being way better than Trump is no reason to vote for him. We've got to vote against both of them. They're both awful. Andy Candy says, too bad no governor or state attorney spoke up for Bernie when he was stolen from the people. Yep. Andy Candy, I only made it to high school, had to work, huge family to help. How does the public not see the fascism and danger in hand when I see it clearly? I think it's because a lot of the public doesn't care about the fascism, okay, at hand, or the fascist danger. First of all, there's almost fascism under Biden. There's fascism in many ways, okay, under Biden. So people think, well, hell, I'm so fed up with Biden. How much worse can Trump actually be? They don't see it clearly because they haven't been studying the history of fascism. Okay. They don't understand how much worse Trump can be depending on who he gets to serve with him, okay, inside of the government. So it's the contrast between Biden and Trump. That's the problem. If the Democrats were to nominate somebody like even a Jeff Merkley, and people got to know Jeff, okay, over a few months, Jeff would swamp Trump because Jeff is a decent man and a moral man, and it shines through. Sheldon Whitehouse is a decent man, okay, and a moral man. Sherrod Brown is a decent man. There are a number of senators who are decent persons. Kirsten Gillibrand is a decent person. We are not doomed to have Biden versus Trump. But we have to undermine the power of a Democratic National Committee to shove somebody down our throat that we want to have nothing to do with. And by the way, if they decide finally that Biden is not viable and they want to get rid of him, you can be sure they're going to run to Bobo Newsom. They're going to run, okay, to Newsom. Because Nancy Pelosi and her coterie of followers wants him. And the consultants want their deal flow not to be disturbed. And Newsom will not disturb it. He will serve them. And he will serve the moneyed interests just as well as Biden. And he might be able to fool people better than Biden. And therefore beat Trump. In fact, okay, I have to say, I think the DNC has been impossibly stupid and corrupt to continue to support Biden. They should have forced him out 6 months ago and gone to Newsom. I mean, they're irrational and stupid. Andy Candy says, Center is an establishment dolt anyway, from what I remember. Sorry, Center? I'm not sure who Center is. Kay says, yes, Candy. Thanks, Kay. I thought he was a snake. Kay says, you aren't alone, Candy. Sorry, meant to write the Jenk Uyghur. Stupid autocorrect. Jeffrey Denton is here and he smiles. Haven't seen you in a while, Jeff. Joe, do you realize you're teaching a whole course anti-corruption fascism, don't you? You deserve the Nobel Prize. I hereby nominate you. Thank you, Andy. Andy says, thanks for the clarification about inverted totalitarianism. I often don't have the time to look into topics. Just Google inverted totalitarianism. There's a great article on it, okay, in Wikipedia. Andy says, hell, just learning about the Holocaust in high school should make everyone see what fascism is. Or don't they teach about the Holocaust anymore? Yeah, having the Holocaust is a possibility in fascism. But most fascisms did not go as far, okay, as Nazism. For example, okay, in Mussolini's fascism, they were really tough, okay, on the dissenters, but you didn't have wholesale killing of people. In Pinochet's brand of fascism, there were a lot of people killed. There were people thrown out of helicopters and stuff like that. But there wasn't uh, the kind of mass killing that took place, okay, under Nazism. In Hitler's case, he was not only a fascist, he was an insane fascist. Okay, I think Trump is more similar to Mussolini, okay, than Hitler. Okay, I don't mean to compliment him, but he's more similar to Mussolini, okay, than he is to Hitler. But he's going to set up concentration camps for his opponents. He's going to put people in jail. He's going to repress dissent, okay, all over the United States. He's not going to fight with Russia. I think he'll even back off, okay, with respect to China. But when it comes to Israel, he's probably going to risk war, okay, in Western Asia. And that's going to eventually develop into a nuclear war situation. It's hugely dangerous. Hugely dangerous, okay, for the world. I think the dangers inherent in that region of the world are going to be damped down by BRICS and by the projects now being started by the Russia-China combination, but it will be years before the danger, okay, of nuclear war is damped down there if we continue on the course that we have right now. Only today there's been major escalation there, okay, with the killing, okay, of Salah, Salah, okay, al-Aurora, okay, and also with the terrorist attack, okay, in Iran. Those were two instances, okay, where the Israeli regime is trying to drag the United States into okay, a regional war, okay, in that area, because the Israelis can't win against the forces coming together against them alone. They have to have us actually fighting there. Kay Ryan says education has been ruined in this country. Absolutely, Kay. It's been ruined for years and years by people who oppose education, whose prejudices lead them to oppose and to undermine education. Andy Candy says, oh crap, we'll have Hunger Games post nuclear war under Trump. I don't know if there'll be Hunger Games if we have a nuclear war with all of the nuclear weapons that are around, all the warheads, okay, that are around. Uh, we will have, okay, a nuclear winter. And I don't think humans are going to survive that. So I don't want to leave you with that particular cheery thought. Have you got any final comments to make, Dee?
What I want to say is what we talked about on my show, that the U.S. has to stay out of a situation in West Asia. The U.S. has got to let Israel stand alone and be on their own with the situation. The U.S. can't be involved. Right now, we're being isolated by the world. It affects us, and we just have to let Israel deal with its own maniac reaction and what they're doing. They're reacting like maniacs. They want to drag the U.S. into the situation, and if the U.S. has to stand and say no, and really mean no, you do this yourself.
Yeah, Biden has to withdraw support. And of course, if he withdraws support, then he's going to anger the Israeli lobby. But what I say to that is, so what? If we run the dump the corruption movement in the way that we ought to run it, the Israeli lobby will no longer be important anyway, because their strength is in the money they have. If we make the money, the role of money in politics, if we make it toxic, we get rid of the Israeli lobby too.
Yes, we do. And we've got a lot of issues here. We look at the homelessness we have here. Everybody should have a home. The medical system, the medical care system, everybody should have medical care. And there's just so many issues. We talk about
Yes,
climate
everybody
change.
should have medical care that is free at the point, okay, of service.
Mhm. Right. Robert says, D, I don't see that it's happening because of APAC. It's going to be a lot worse for the U.S. to get involved in a situation. And it's just, I don't know. The U.S. has got to be strong because we can't be dealing with this anymore. It hurts us. It's hurting us internationally. We're already hurt internationally
Yes,
for our own actions.
I think Lloyd Austin has to stand up and has to tell him, right now, we don't have the military capability to fight a war in West Asia, okay, against Iran. We will lose. We will lose that war, okay, if we try to fight it. You must stay out of bringing American troops, okay, into Western Asia. Okay.
Yeah. And here, Robert was saying we had 195 homeless people die here in 2023.
Yes,
And that is shameful. That is shameful.
that is shame.
Everyone should everyone should have a home.
Everyone should have a home. Everyone should have, okay, a lot of different things. It's perfectly possible. There is no shortage, okay, of money because we, okay, are a monetary sovereign who creates, okay, our own money. Okay, today on Twitter, there was a remark uh, 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 by Bill Goggin. It was a thread involving Stephanie Kelton, okay, and Bill Goggin, okay, and somebody else. Okay, and somebody was asking the question, where is they weren't asking the question, where is the money going to come from? They were asking the question, if I put forward such and such a proposal, okay, is there some way that we can get the money to do this without having to issue any debt instruments? And what happened then, okay, was that Bill Goggins said, yes, there is. And I replied, okay, to Bill Goggins, and I said, well, let's see if I can bring that up pretty fast. Okay, this is in my replies. So let's see. Okay, what I did in reply was very short. Oh, okay, Stephanie said, it's a policy choice. Issuing treasuries is an anachronistic policy based on the gold standard. If we don't like it, we can stop, okay, anytime. This is in response to someone who was tweeting out some stuff that Peter G. Peterson said. There were more replies, and one of them was the one, okay, I mentioned where the person asked, uh, can we do something without having to issue debt instruments? Okay, and there was the reply by Bill Goggin, which I saw, which said, yes, this can be done. Let's see if I can get to my reply. I can't get to it. There are so many replies here to it that it seems to be that. Maybe there's another way to get to this. Okay, Bill Goggin just answered and said, yes, it's possible to do that. And I said, sure. Below is wording that could be placed in any money bill to replace any possible need for selling debt instruments to finance, quote unquote, uh, spending. And just for those of you who don't know, I'm just going to share that with you now. In a Chinese street, a man stumbled upon several dogs being sold without. Okay, let me present that. Okay, there it is. Here is the language that could be put, okay, in any money bill to finance spending without having to use any debt instruments. There is the language. It is right there for you. 2 sentences have to be included, okay, in a money bill. These 2 sentences are called, okay, overt congressional financing. Upon passage of this appropriations bill, the Federal Reserve is directed to fill the Treasury spending account at the New York Federal Reserve with the addition to its reserve balance necessary to spend this appropriation. In addition, the Federal Reserve is directed to fill the Treasury spending account with the additions to the Treasury reserve balances necessary to repay all outstanding debt instruments, including principal and interest, as they fall due for the fiscal year, okay, of this appropriation. So just that language, 2 sentences. Yeah, the sentences are a little complex, but just those 2 sentences have to be put into the boilerplate of a bill that's going to spend money. And then there would be no need to issue any debt instruments. And apart from that, all the debt instruments that were falling due during the period of the appropriation would be paid off. So if this were in every money bill, then the federal debt would be extinguished gradually over a period of 30 years. But most of it would be extinguished in the first 5 years with ease. That's all that has to be done. I'm sorry, Dee, I just had to take the time to show that because I think a lot of people here have never seen that. Okay, other comments. Andy Candy says, I don't think the U.S. will stay out of Western Asia. It'll give them a backdoor to Iran and to thwart the BRICS. Okay, as I say, Andy, uh, the interventions we make, okay, in Western Asia, we no longer have the military capability to make. That's why we have to stay out, okay, of Western Asia. We cannot win in Western Asia, okay, against the combination, uh, okay, involving Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, um, Hamas, okay, the Houthis, and finally Turkey. If they decide, okay, to unite against us, we lose, okay, in Western Asia. They have far too big, okay, an army. We won't be able to win a ground war, okay, in that area. It won't be like Iraq, okay, at all. By the way, Iraq is going to join, okay, the coalition of states, okay, against us. We don't have the military capability to win, okay, a ground war. We don't have the military capability to win a war of missiles, okay, and rockets. And we don't have, okay, the military to win a naval war in that area because our ships can be destroyed by the missiles and the rockets and the drones that will be coming from the other side. So we have to stay out, okay, of Western Asia. Also, there's no way to thwart the BRICS combination. The reason why there's no way to thwart it is because the BRICS combination is a constructive effort that will benefit, okay, the nations that are involved, okay, in BRICS. And we are not offering them anything positive. We're offering them conversion. We're offering them various kinds of moral objections, which don't carry any weight anymore because of our own immoral foreign policy. And we really have nothing to offer them. So we can't thwart BRICS. We can't thwart what the Chinese are doing without totally changing our foreign policy. And that total change in our foreign policy is going to have to involve a military withdrawal from Western Asia. Any presence we have in Western Asia going forward is going to have to be based on constructive kinds of economic relations, okay, with Western Asia, and we are not building those. Robert Copeland says, D, I don't see that as happening because of APAC. Well, again, dump the corruption is the answer to APAC. We had 195 homeless people die here in 2023, and that was just in Sacramento, right? Yeah. Kay says, sorry, Robert. Kay says, okay, guys, I'm going to bed. Kay, love you all. We love you too, Kay. Andy Kenny says, I believe you, Joe. Okay, but Americans are so drunk on jingoism and hero movies, they'll go for it. Yeah, I'm afraid of that too, Andy. We might go for it. And if we go for it, we're going to sustain a defeat. And if we sustain a defeat, then that, of course, feeds fascism here in the United States as well. It's so important at this point that Biden finally say no to Israel. Finally, let them settle matters, okay, on their own.
That's true.
They will soon find that they don't have the power to impose a settlement, and then they will move to negotiate one. And that settlement can then be a two-state solution. They will find a way to get to that kind of a solution if their very existence is threatened. They will accept that two states are better than no state. They will take control of their extremists. They will get them out of power themselves. And they will repatriate the settlers, either by integrating them into the Israeli state or by sending them home to where they came from. Robert Copeland says, so if the United States is in a war with Turkey, that means two NATO countries fighting each other? Yeah, it means the end of NATO. Yeah, but Turkey has already made hostile noises, against the United States. Turkey has a bigger effective army right now than we have. And it has the capability to double that army fairly easily. Last time I looked, Turkey had something like 90 million people there. To see how much that is and what kind of military capability that gives you, when, God bless you, when the Nazis fought in the Second World War, they had something like, maybe 70 million people, 60 million people. And when they launched the attack on Russia, they launched it with 175 divisions. They were able to mobilize 175 divisions to fight with Russia. Ask yourself, how many divisions does the U.S. Army have right now? Maybe 20 divisions? Maybe 30 divisions? Turkey has the capability to mobilize 175 divisions if it wants to. And by the way, Iran has a population nearly the same size, as Turkey. I'm telling you, if they unite over there, we don't have the capability to do anything. So we might as well just come home right now. Let the Israelis handle their situation themselves. They have made their bed. Now let them sleep in it.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, Robert says Turkey has almost 85 million people as of 2021. So, Turkey, can you Google and find the estimated population of Turkey as of 2023? And do the same for Iran right now. See what we're looking at. Andy says, thank you for another fantastic live stream. A breakthrough to get the corruption out there will come. Asking the divine universe for mercy. I certainly hope so. I'm getting tired, of originating this. I need to hand this over to some young people who can work the way I used to work, like 16 hours a day to get something done for months at a time. I can't do that anymore. Bonnie says, we should demand free education and free health care. Yes, she would. at all levels of education.
Mm-hmm.
And
And we could have that. We could have it.
we can have it. We have the financial capability because we are, okay, a monetary sovereign. We can have that. And we can have a lot else. We can have housing for all our people. We can have those child tax credits, okay, that everybody loved. We can have a job guarantee program and a true socially inclusive type of living wage. We can have that. So nobody ever has to worry about situation of unemployment again. We can create, okay, a paradise here
Mm-hmm.
if we want to create that paradise. But in order to do that, we have to get the people who are bought by the interests, okay, out. Robert says Iran has around 88 million people as of 2021. Robert, can you get estimates for 2023? There are projections for both countries. Just Google 2023 population of Turkey, 2023 population, okay, of Iran. Okay, to see how much that is, if we're looking at, let's say, an average of 85 million people in both of those countries, that's 170 million people. That's a larger population than the current population of Russia right now, which is probably somewhere around 145 to 150 million people. Andy Candy says we'll send Bonnie as our ambassador for peace in the Middle East to NATO or somewhere special because she's special. She is special, believe me. She's very special.
Thank you.
Anyway, thanks everyone for a fun live stream.
Mm.
And I'll see you tomorrow with the neoliberalism show. Okay. And Dee, are you going to have a show tomorrow?
Yes, I will have a show. Yes, I will have a show.
Okay.
We'll
So,
see what's up, what happens overnight.
so you'll have Dee's show at 8 and my show, okay, at 9. And then I will have another Friday show, okay, another Dump the Corruption show, okay, on Friday. Hopefully, I'll be
Okay.
to follow up this one with another good show on Friday. Okay, don't forget, we both have the Buy Me a Coffee accounts. And there is my Buy Me a Coffee account going right across the stream, buymeacoffee.com/Joe.Firestone. And Dee has a Buy Me a Coffee account, which is front slash
D Pierce.
okay, D Pierce, just one word. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And Dee also has a Cash App account.
Dolores Pierce.
Yeah,
DOLO.
yes,
Are you?
Lores.
Yes.
Dolores.
Dolores Pierce.
Dolores Pierce. And I have a Patreon account, which is right in front of you up there,
Mm-hmm.
which is
And
part, okay, of my, okay, identifier.
mm,
And Robert says 85.8 million people in Turkey as of 2023. Thank you, Robert. Okay. So good night, everyone.
and
Again.
I just want to add to please hit the like button, subscribe, and share, share, share. Share the
Yes.
show out.
Yeah. Please do get the show out. Okay. If you're on Twitter, if any of you are on Twitter, okay, get the show out on Twitter. Because for some reason, my shows seem to be much more popular on Twitter than they are on YouTube or on Facebook. I'm not sure why that's the case. Maybe it's because I'm spending more time on Twitter than I am on YouTube and Facebook. But that's the way it is, I guess. So thanks again, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow.
Yes. Good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
And good night,
Good night.
Dee.
Yeah.
Thank
Good
you.
night. See you tomorrow.
Bye.
You're welcome. Thank you.